Was there a secret Nazi base in Antarctica? A glance at the internet suggests this is proven fact. But do the claims stand up to historical scrutiny? And how much is truth and how much fiction? Did the Nazis visit Antarctica? The answer is a definite yes, and it's well documented. But sorry to disappoint anyone expecting tales of UFOs and secret bases. The German Antarctic expedition was considerably more mundane. Between December 1938 and April 1939, a German research vessel called the Schwabenland carried a Nazi expedition to the Antarctic coast in an area already claimed by Norway and known as Queen Maud Land. The German expedition, commanded by a professional naval officer, carried out scientific studies, mapped mountains, and named them after themselves, and flew many reconnaissance missions using 2 ship-launched Dornier floatplanes that included dropping metal swastika-adorned territorial markers claiming the area for the Third Reich. The expedition was launched because of whale oil. Germany, like many European nations at the time, needed huge quantities of whale oil for margarine production and other uses. Overhunting had meant that the whalers had to move into southern waters, and 50 German whale catchers and 7 factory ships operated off Queen Maud Land during the 1938-39 season. The Germans wanted to establish a secret base for German whalers on the Antarctic coast. Some amazing discoveries were made by the expedition, particularly aerial searches that discovered a strange warm region, the ice-free Schirmacher Oasis, now the location of 2 research stations in 2018. When World War II broke out, the British, who controlled a swathe of Antarctic territory, as well as the South Sandwich Islands, South Georgia and the Falkland Islands, were concerned about German surface raiders and U-boats interfering in the Allied whaling operations in the region. Indeed, in February 1941, the German auxiliary cruiser Penguin patrolled the Ross Sea off the Antarctic coast in an attempt to sink Allied whalers. She seized over 20,000 tons of precious whale oil from 3 Norwegian vessels. Indeed, the British were so concerned that Germany, or even Japan, might attempt to use Antarctic coastal islands or the mainland as U-boat bases, that it launched Operation Tabarin in 1943. A side objective was to deter Argentina from its claims to the Falklands and other Antarctic islands. A number of small British bases were established in the area, and as well as looking out for enemy vessels, the staff conducted scientific research. This mission eventually morphed into the British Antarctic Survey, which still exists today. 2 of my previous videos have dealt with 2 mysterious German submarines, U-530 and U-977, that unexpectedly appeared and surrendered in Argentina months after World War II had ended in Europe. Both voyages are extremely suspicious and point to some kind of Nazi operation to land people or valuables in Argentina, which had a large German and pro-Nazi population. However, some people have suggested that one or both of these U-boats had first visited Antarctica before surrendering in Argentina. Some speculative and exaggerated newspaper stories in the local Argentine press at the time suggested that Hitler himself had been offloaded in Antarctica. The person responsible for this fiction was a Hungarian exile living in Argentina called Ladislas Szabo. He published a book called Hitler is Alive in 1947, setting out his evidence. Despite no actual concrete evidence, and the commander of both German submarines denying such a voyage or the existence of such a secret base, Szabo's fiction has become accepted fact in some quarters. Another problem with the idea of U-boats visiting the Antarctic coast is that June, July and August are the midwinter months in the southern hemisphere. A submarine would have trouble approaching the Antarctic coast. Pack ice, 1 to 2 meters thick, surrounds the coastline during the winter. It has been shown to extend between 500 and over 1,600 kilometers out from the coast between May and July. Both submarines would had to have travelled huge distances under the ice, many hundreds of kilometres or even thousands of kilometres. This was not feasible because these submarines were not true submarines but rather submersibles. They ran on the surface using diesel engines, and when submerged they could use a snorkel to suck in fresh air to allow the diesels to continue running, which would be impossible if they were under the ice, or they could run on electric batteries which powered the motors, and these required recharging. The other thing was the crew needed fresh air, so every 2 days or so the submarine would have to have surfaced through the pack ice. And is this feasible? Could German U-boats of the size and type really punch through 1 to 2 meters of ice? Navigation would have been very difficult due to 24-hour darkness and heavy cloud cover. If they had reached the coast alive, the U-boat crews would have then encountered average temperatures of minus 26 degrees Celsius with a wind speed of around 15 kilometers an hour, producing conditions of about minus 40 degrees Celsius. The story has been continuously elaborated down the decades. One story is Hitler's cremated remains were transported to the secret Nazi base in Antarctica and interred, along with boxes full of Nazi treasure hidden in an ice cave. Expanding on Szabo's original fiction, writers have even suggested that a 1947 US Navy expedition to Antarctica called Operation High Jump secretly battled die-hard Nazis and lost, the Nazis possibly having extraterrestrial assistance. In reality, High Jump was a huge exercise to train ships' companies and aircrew in operating in such hostile conditions, and to establish a US military base in Antarctica called Little America 4. One plane did indeed crash in Antarctica, and 3 of the crew members were killed, while another sailor was killed in an accident. Another story doing the rounds is linked to Operation Tabarin. It says an elite SAS unit had the German base under surveillance during the war. The British launched a commando attack to neutralize it around Christmas 1945, which failed. The German base was finally destroyed by exploding 3 atomic bombs above it in 1958. Aside from the dubious source material, the reality of an SAS raid in Christmas 1945 was impossible, as the regiment had been disbanded in October 1945 and was not reformed until 1948. Some writers suggest that the truth of all this has been suppressed from the general public. The problem is, all of this has an element of truth to it. The Germans did indeed plan to build an Antarctic base, but were interrupted by the outbreak of World War II. There were secret British bases in Antarctica during the war. Operation High Jump was a military operation, and indeed 3 nuclear weapons were detonated in the general region in 1958. The atomic blasts, codenamed Operation Argus, were conducted by the United States 1,760 kilometers southwest of Cape Town, South Africa. They were 3 very high-altitude test shots. The closest detonation to Queen Maud Land in Antarctica and the purported German base was number 2, which exploded 2,280 kilometers north at an altitude of 290 kilometers, which is a bit high if you're trying to knock out the secret Nazi base. If a German base exists in the area several writers have alleged it to be in, then why hasn't it been found in nearly 80 years? Queen Maud Land has been visited by over 1,000 scientists in those decades. There are many modern bases in the region, yet not one piece of corroborated physical evidence has ever emerged. Truth has been interwoven with fiction, and the resulting mix served up as fact to the general public, perpetuated and further exaggerated by the internet and by books and TV programs of dubious veracity. I hope you've enjoyed this film. Please subscribe, share,